All right, chapter 5. This is going to be a big undertaking. I don't know how much of it I'll do. All right, chapter 5. It's going to be a big undertaking. I don't know how much of it I'll do. This may be 5, 6, 7, 8, now landing at gates 1, 2, 3. But the point is, I'm going to get in some very interesting stuff, and there's an awful lot of it. I'll do the easiest stuff first. Gary William Applegate, Marjorie Burge, Johnny Burge, Rufus Burge. His father was Johnny Longstreet Burge. His father was Joseph Burge. His father was Jonathan Burge. His father was Joseph Burge. And his father was Joseph Burge. Joseph Burge, 1723 to 1783, was married to Sarah Morris. Sarah Morris was born in 1727 in Monmouth, New Jersey, and she died in 1782 in Freehold. Well, she probably was in Squonkam. We're going to be looking at Sarah Morris. Sarah Morris is a very interesting woman because she was living on, they called it a plantation in those days, but it was a farm in Squonkam, New Jersey, Squonkam Road, out, southern Monmouth County, just north of Lakewood. The farm was right around where 195 crosses Squonkam Road right now. I'm going to show you what's interesting about Sarah Morris. Sarah Morris's father was Richard Morris. His mother, Richard Morris's mother, was Elizabeth Olney. Elizabeth Olney's mother was Elizabeth Cornell. And Elizabeth Cornell's mother was Thomas Cornell. Thomas Cornell, father was George Cornell. His father was Richard Cornell. And we're pretty far back now. We're starting with Sarah, who lived in the 1700s, 1727 to 1782. We're now about 220 years earlier with Robert Cornell. Richard Cornell's father is Robert Cornell, born in 1495. Not quite pre-Columbian times, but just about. If you notice here, Robert's father was Lawrence P. Cornwall. Wonder what the P stands for. I was tracing back Sarah Morris. Got to the Cornells, and I liked the name Cornell because it's a college name, Cornell, and I thought maybe these guys had something to do. Notice up here they become Cornwall. Well, part of England is on the coast is called Cornwall. So that's not, and also Cornwall is used sort of interchangeably with Cornwallis, and I thought maybe, although it's already earlier than American Revolution, maybe I'm a cousin to General Cornwallis. But when I got back to 16 generations, this Cornwall, Lawrence, his middle name was Plantagenet. Well, that could just be a name, but if it was a family name, if he was a Plantagenet, it meant he was royalty. The Plantagenet were the royal family of England. To this day, you trace if you're Queen Elizabeth has a right to be queen because she can trace her family back through the Plantagenet. So if that's 16 generations back, and Sarah was 8 generations back, it means that as far away as she is from me, Sarah's 8 generations behind me, as far away as she is from me, from today, Lawrence, who had the name Plantagenet, was from her. So just as I didn't know about her, and her being a Plantagenet, she may not have known that she was descended from Lawrence Cornwall, a Plantagenet, because he is a Plantagenet. His father, 1440, now we're pre-Columbian, was Thomas Cornwall, Otis Cornwall, Edmund Cornwall of Burford. Once you start seeing names like that, you begin to realize these are royal names. His father was, Elizabeth de la Barre. These are Sir Richard de Cornwall, 5th Baron Burford, is the first Baron. I had a few knights, and I thought that a lady and a knight, I thought that was a pretty big deal, that we weren't all serfs and hillbillies and pineys. But you go back 20 generations, and you've got a knight who's a Baron. So I guess I've already come to the conclusion that these are Plantagenets for him to be a Baron. Well, that sort of piques my interest because Henry II was a Plantagenet. His grandfather was William the Conqueror, great-grandfather. So I just want to see how far back it goes. Baron, 1335. Now I'm getting back further than I've been already doing Sarah Morris. Another Baron, 5th Baron, 3rd Baron, 2nd Baron. Geoffrey of Cornwall, about 1288. Now that's a long, She's married to a Mortimer. Now the Mortimers were on the Welsh marches. Geoffrey married Margaret. I knew the Mortimers had interest in Richard. I didn't know enough about the Mortimers yet to realize this was a cousin of the main Mortimers. But I'm also descended through Sarah from the other Mortimers. Richard de Cornwall Thunnock, 1252. And then I see Richard Plantagenet, 1st Earl of Cornwall. Well, that's pretty good. 1209. I wonder who his father is. His father is King John. John Plantagenet, son of Henry II, brother of Richard the Lionhearted. And he is my 24th great-grand, 26 generations back. So 18 generations back from Sarah Morris on Squonkam Road, we get to King John, the guy that was fighting Robin Hood in all the movies, the guy that signed the Magna Carta. My 24th great, if you say great, 24 times, 26 generations, I'm descended from him. And more important than him is his father. His father is Henry II, the Lion in Winter, Richard O'Toole. Played him in Becket as well. Peter O'Toole played Lawrence of Arabia and Henry II twice. He's one of the greatest kings of medieval times, established the Plantagenet line in England, the royal line that they still use that is traced back to the Stuarts and the Windsors. And I'm a direct ancestor of his as well. Well, his father was a French count named Geoffrey Plantagenet. But his mother was Empress Matilda of England, Holy Roman Empress, and daughter of Henry I of England. So now we have another king. And Henry I of England was the son of William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror is my 28th great-grandfather, 30 generations back. This is just one of Sarah Marshall's lines. Once you get to royalty, they all marry each other. It never stops. There's just more kings and more kings and more kings. William, of course, was Duke of Normandy. He came to England in 1066. At the Battle of Hastings, he defeated Harold and made himself king and established his line. His father was Robert FitzRichard, means son of Fitz. FitzRichard, Robert was son of Richard. Richards was son of Richard the Good. These are Dukes of Normandy now. And I brought it back to Rollo. The first, his father was Richard. This is FitzRobert because Rafflesid Rollo took the name Robert, the Christian name Robert. Rollo was the first Viking from Norway to land and conquer land in Normandy, make himself made himself the Duke of Normandy, recognized by the King of France. It's 35 generations back. This means, Ganghoff means the walker, because he was too big to be carried by a horse, so he had to walk. He was a pretty tough dude. His son by the name was called Longsword, so they had cool names. That's FitzRobert is Longsword. And we're looking at 860 to 931 for Rollo. That's a long time back. That's Dark Ages. Now, in another line, I go back even farther from Rollo, in fact, in two other lines. But for now, I just wanted to show you what's a little taste of what Sarah Morris has in store. Let's do a little bit more Sarah Morris. From Emperor Matilda, we also have her mother, who was Matilda of Scotland. Her mother was a saint, Saint Margaret of Scotland and Wessex. Her father was Malcolm III, King of Scots. You might remember Malcolm from Macbeth. Malcolm is the king whose army kills Macbeth at the end. Malcolm's father was Duncan, the king who's murdered by Macbeth. So Shakespeare was writing about my 30th generation, 28 great-great-great-grandfather, and my 29th great-great-grandfather, 31 generations back. Let's go a little further and see what's happening. This is just one line of Sarah Morris's family. This is just the Cornells. I talked about St. Margaret of Wessex. Her father was Edward the Exile. His father was Edmund Ironside, King of England. His father was Ethelred the Unready, King of England. His father was Edgar the Peaceful, King of England. His father was Edmund I, King of England. His father was Edward the Elder, King of the Anglo-Saxons. They didn't call it England then. His father was Alfred the Great, King of Wessex. Now, you've all heard of Alfred the Great, the father of the English Navy, or you should have heard of him. He is my 37 generations back, my 36th great-grandfather. From Sarah Morris. His father was Ethelred, King of Wessex. Wessex is England. Ecgbert, King of Wessex. These guys are starting to get back into legendary times where there's very little history. And aside from the kings, there's no history. Aylmund, King of Kent. That Kent was next to Wessex. Then we have Aoife of Kent, sort of a legendary figure. Eopa of Kent, and England of Wessex. These were Saxons, overthrown by the Normans 200 years later. 200 years later, under William the Conqueror. Let me do a few more here. The princes of Kiev were Viking kings, and we'll look more at them later. Viking kings of Russia. Kiev was Russia. Her mother was Estrid of the Oberites, and her father was King Olaf of Sweden, one of the first kings of Sweden. Peter I of Courtenay of Courtenay is interesting. He's starting to get way back. His Louis VI of France, we go deeper into the Capet kings of France, which he is one, but he was the father of Peter. And all of these people are historical. You can look them all up on Wikipedia, and that's the coolest thing. It's even cooler when you look up and realize that you got some of the genetics in you. Okay, do a little bit more in this same realm. If we go Thomas Cornwall, he married the Baroness de Clifford. Okay. The de Cliffords are an old British family, Norman family, and you see the D, you know that means from, that's Norman. Henry, 1420 to 1485, his father was James de Clifford. His father was Henry de Clifford, 1390 to 1452. And they were nobles, they were barons. His father was James de Clifford, 1350s. John de Clifford, 1310. William de Clifford, 1270. William de Clifford, 1235. Notice he was born in Frampton. I wonder if Peter Frampton is a cousin. Henry de Clifford, 1190. Lord de Clifford, Richard, of Frampton again, First Barony Clifford Fitzrichard, 1127. Richard Fitzpons, okay, 1065. He was born a year before Hastings. He's my 26th great-grandfather. His father was Pons Fitzpons. His father was Pons Fitzwilliam. His father was William I, Count of Eu. Richard I Fitzwilliam the Fearless, Duke of Normandy. Now we're getting into William the Conqueror's family. This is 933. So these guys are cousins to William the Conqueror. William Fitzrobert, Duke Longsword. This is the one, and this is Rollo. I said we were going to go back further. This is Rollo. This is the guy that had to walk because he was too big for a horse. His father was Ragvald Eysteinsson, Earl of Moor in Norway. His father was Eystein Iverson the Noisy. Never met Dave Anderson, I'm sure. His father was, and this is where we start getting into sagas. His father was Ivar Halfdanson, whose father was Halfdan the Aged, whose father was Hytrison, Sea King. They didn't even have king, they were Viking pillagers. Around 760. That's the Dark Ages now. His father was Heitor Gorason. Now we really get into myths now. These people only exist in sagas. It's almost impossible to find them in real life. This is just a second branch of Sarah Morris's family. We have Gore Thorson, Sea King, and then only exist in myths somewhere around 314 in Finland. His father somewhere around 245. These guys live a long time because they live in myths. They live 100 years. His father is Frosty Karansson, mythical king. Vinland is Finland, mythical king of Vinland. His father is the Wind, Fundratsson, king of Finland. And his father is as far back as you can go. It's probably around 500 AD, but the sagas say it's 189 AD. If the sagas kept time correctly, this would be the oldest, the farthest back I could go. But it's probably, these guys didn't live 200 years, each of them, so he probably is 400 years, 300 years older than he's supposed to be. But he's the ancient giant. He's a semi-historical figure. He's the oldest Plantagenet. You can trace William the Conqueror back to the ancient giant king of Finland. My 44th great-grandfather, 46 generations back. He's a semi-historical, semi-mythical figure. That's just a little taste of what you can get from Sarah Morris. It's a very cool Viking. Remember, William the Conqueror was descended from Vikings. England wasn't conquered by Frenchmen, it was conquered by Normans who were Norwegians. Okay, just as interesting from the Cornwalls, which takes us back there. There's a lot to do with Sarah Morris. So I don't know if I'll do it all in this first one, but if you notice here, Thomas Cornell's mother was Susan Cassie. Her mother was Marjorie Bishop. And Marjorie Bishop's father was Sir Thomas Bishop, Lady Marjorie Grey. So, starting to think, when I first came upon this, that, royalty, maybe we have something. Well, Stuarts caught my eye because the Stuarts are the royal family of Scotland. And her father was John Stuart. His father was the Black Knight of Lorne, a historical figure. His father is Sir John Stuart. And his father is Sir Robert Stuart, another historical figure. Beaufort. Now the Beauforts, when you get to the War of the Roses, the Beauforts are the family of kings. But Somerset, John of Gaunt. Now this is the War of the Roses here. Isabella, right? John of Gaunt was a king in Spain, but he wasn't a king in England. But he was a Duke of Lancaster. And his illegitimate son, had an illegitimate son called Henry Tudor, and that's Henry VIII's father. John of Gaunt, Henry VIII and Henry Tudor claimed the throne of England because they were Plantagenets, John of Gaunt. And if you look a little bit here at John of Gaunt's father was Edward III. His father was the weak, disastrous king, Edward II. His father was the great king, Edward I. His father was Henry III. And I stop because I go back. I do this another family. But Edward I married Eleanor of Castile, which brings me to the Ferdinand, King of Castile. This is the families that became, 200 years later, Ferdinand and Isabella. They're cousins of mine. I'm not directly descended from them. Philip III of France is a Capet king. St. Louis the Ninth, king. Louis VIII. Philip II. Louis I. These are Capet kings. Louis V and Philip I of France. They were called Franks, the king of the Franks, and not necessarily king of France. King of Aragon. We have kings of Hungary here. Poland, king of Poland, 32 generations back. Kings of Hungary. This is Grand Prince Mstislav of Kiev. Now Kiev was Russia. It was a Viking kingdom. This is interesting. I'm going to stop here after I do this little section and come back to Sarah Morris. I'm going to continue next chapter just to give you some more. But this is something interesting that I found. These were Viking kings, and if you follow them, his father was Vladimir, his father was Vislovad, his father was Yaroslav, his father was Vladimir, the great prince of Novgorod. This is getting near the beginning. His father was Sviatoslav, Igor, and then you get to Rurik. And Rurik was around 830. That's the beginning of time in Russia. There's no records before that. Rurik was the first Viking to come and be a king, and he is my 33rd great-grandfather. I've read about Rurik my whole life, this Viking that conquered Russia, but I didn't realize I was descended from him. That's not the story I wanted to tell here. Mstislav married Githa of Wessex, an English woman. She was actually Anglo-Saxon, and she had fled England after the Norman invasion and gone to the king of the Danes, who actually held her prisoner, and then he gave her to the king of Sweden, who married her to his kinsman, the Grand Prince of Kiev. Why was she good enough to be married to a prince? Why was she, a prize? Because her father was King Harold of England. King Harold died on October 14, 1066 at Hastings, shot with an arrow in the eye. He's my 28th great-grandfather. He was on the opposite side of the field from my great-grandfather, William the Conqueror, at Hastings. They fought. I'm descended from both the Anglo-Saxon king and from the Norman king. And just to show you how history falls apart as you get into the Middle Ages, because it becomes a dark age. It gets dark really fast. His father was the Earl of Wessex, Godwin. That's why he's Godwinson's son of Godwin. And his father was Wulfnoth Kil, and that's all. There's no more. History doesn't record any more of the Anglo-Saxons. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment here and maybe do Lord Grey here. Marjorie Grey's father, Lord Grey, takes in some very Scottish things. And I never thought I had any Scotch in me, but I got a lot of Scotch in me. So I'm going to pause. The next chapter will continue with Sarah Morris, but we'll be looking at the Welsh Marches, and we'll be looking at the Stuarts. All right.